Hello, I'm Marissa McGrady, the editor-in-chief for iPULSE, Lynn University's student news organization, and this is the first episode of this semester's iPULSE Chat. I'm joined today by my co-host Veronica. Veronica, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Veronika Cichowska. I'm a senior here at Lynn University. I play on the tennis team, and I'm a multimedia communication major.
And our guest, Dr. Robert Watson. Would you like to say a few things?
Robert Watson, been at Lynn for 14 years, professor for 30 years, and
Wow.
I teach history and politics.
Wow, fantastic. And what we're going to be talking about today is how the youth can get politically involved, generally speaking, the political climate, some resources for people, and let's get started. So the first question that I have for you today, Dr. Watson, and for you, Veronica, as well, is what state do you think our democracy is in right now? Like, how would you describe the political climate in light, of course, of the recent Senate vote and the acquittal?
Thank you. I think, it's very divided politically. The
Absolutely.
Democrats are fighting the Republicans, and it's not healthy for our nation at all, and something needs to change. There has to be some give and take, and something has to change, or we're going to be in trouble.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's alarming. I've been writing books about teaching, researching politics for my whole adult life, and this is worse today than any time since the Civil War. The gridlock, the dysfunction, the just vitriol and venom that has been poured into the political waters. Sadly, for your generation, folks don't realize that just 10, 20, 30 years ago, it was very common for Democrats and Republicans in Congress to be good friends. George McGovern on the far left and Bob Dole on the far right, both of whom ran for president, were best friends. Ronald Reagan, a conservative Republican president, and Tip O'Neill, a very liberal Speaker of the House, were very close friends. So we've lost this sense of civility. And the big problem for that is democracy doesn't work without some give and take, some compromise, some consensus, some team building, and we're to the point now where people just won't speak to one another. So that bodes very poorly, especially when you look at the number of serious issues that are facing this country today.
Exactly. And I think that issue is kind of the crux of what we're going to get at. People won't talk to each other, right? And especially when we're talking about young people, when they're negatively impacted by their attempts to get involved in politics, since they can't necessarily vote, they kind of get this sense of what I call the paradox of the youth, which I'll explain in just a second, where adults and politicians and local authorities encourage high school students to get involved, to voice their opinions, to write for the paper, to call senators. But then they kind of flip the script, almost like a bait and switch, when they get involved in ways that those politicians don't necessarily agree with. For example, when President Trump was mocking Greta Thunberg on Twitter, when Republican candidate Leslie Gibson called Emma Gonzalez, the leader of the March for Our Lives movement, a, quote, skinhead lesbian. And I feel as though, both personally, and Veronica, if you would like to talk about this, you totally can, that necessarily when the youth try and get involved as people tell them to do so, they're met with just as much negative backlash as when they don't get involved, which leaves them with this kind of sense of hopelessness, which we hope we can provide some resources for today. Veronica, do you agree with that?
I have an opinion on it. I think, of course, no one should be bullying anybody, especially I'm a bullying victim myself. When I was in middle school, I was very severely bullied. But I think when you go into politics, that's like a very cutthroat world. And to go into it, you have to have like a really, really tough skin. Like Greta Thunberg, she spoke at the UN...
the climate summit, yeah.
Yes, exactly, the climate summit. And she was so emotional, she was raw, she was crying, but she got her point across. She stuck through it, she fought through it, she got her point across. And later, like a few days later, there were memes about her crying and people calling her a crybaby, but she didn't let that stop her from what she believed in. She kept going. So that's just what people have to do now, even especially if you're young. I know it's hard, but you just have to push aside the negative comments and just fight for what you believe in.
And those two weren't the only ones. David Hogg, who joined Emma Gonzalez in leading the March for Our Lives, and the Stoneman Douglas, when he didn't get into Harvard, Fox conservative commentators made fun of him on national television. The great, lovely irony is they ended up reconsidering and admitting him. Malala has changed the world conversation on these issues, and she was picked on mercilessly. Here's the way I see it. This, in some way, of course, it's unforgivable.
Of course.
Especially for adults to be. Rush Limbaugh, who the President Trump just gave the Presidential Medal of Freedom to, he used to make fun of Chelsea Clinton, who was a straight-A student who went to Stanford, went to Oxford, was in the ballet, on the soccer team. He used to make fun of her, an adult, making fun of a teenage girl, which is the case in all these. But you know what? in a way, this is good training, because politics is a combat sport,
course.
and you got to grow some thick skin,
Exactly.
and look at where you are now and how you've
Yeah.
overcome it, and what a role model you can be for other students facing it. And you know what? I've always looked at this kind of thing as, I measure my success by how much opposition I get. If
Wow.
nobody's upset at me, I'm not changing the world, and I'm not making
Right.
progress. These Republican and Fox News commentators, presidents, members of Congress, if they weren't threatened by teenage Greta's message or by Emma Gonzalez's strength, they wouldn't be attacking them. And
Exactly.
ultimately, Greta's word, Emma's word, David Hogg's word, Malala's word, these are the words that are going to carry with your generation
Of course.
long after Rush Limbaugh and Donald Trump are forgotten. So it's shameful, but in a way, they need to wear these as warrior
Yeah,
marks,
exactly.
as badges of honor. So if I'm doing my work, and I lecture to community groups, I do political consulting, I'm out literally every day of the week, weekends included. If somebody's not pushing back, I need to double down on my efforts.
Exactly. And I think you both put it very well when you said that it was in fact bullying. I think it's important to note that there's a distinction between someone disagreeing with another political representative, or even, as you said earlier, being venomous or having animosity between two political representatives, which we see a lot today, and someone going online making ad hominem attacks to a child, right?
Yeah,
Go ahead, sorry.
You can express your own opinion, especially if you're disagreeing with someone, in a respectful way without putting them down or tearing them down.
Absolutely.
One of my heroes is Harry Truman, former president, and Truman used to always tell his aides, not only can you disagree with me, that's a direct order. But
Wow.
Truman always said anything goes as long as it's fact-based and civil. And we seem to have gotten away from that. We need to remember that democracy is a participatory. We need debate, we need dissent, we need disagreement. The fact that today, if anybody disagrees, they're attacked is very problematic. You know, we've had, if you take President Trump, for example, we've had other presidents. I think Lyndon Johnson was like this. I think others were like this. Nixon, if you disagreed with them, you were fired. Under President Truman, he got rid of the people that didn't disagree with him. But the difference was back then the disagreement was healthy, civil, fact-based.
Exactly.
And now it's just shameful bullying.
Exactly. And I think that's kind of like a good way to segue into the other topic of the youth, because there's literal bullying taking place, because of the extreme partisanship, because of the divide, the inability to reach across the aisle and shake another's hand. I personally fear for the future of our democracy, because I see that these youths, when they try to get involved in the democratic process, which should be applauded and encouraged, are being attacked. So what I would like to talk about a little bit today is some local ways that children can get involved, not children, but teenagers, so on and so forth.
Kids all the way up through college students.
Exactly.
Sure.
Anybody can use these resources, but specifically those high schoolers who are not yet able to actually vote and express themselves in the true democratic process. But there are so many different ways that they can get involved with the democracy. So a couple of the things that I thought we could talk about are maybe both of y'all's opinions on things like peaceful protests, such as the Fridays for Future movement started by Thunberg, the March for Our Lives movement, and contacting local representatives, contacting national representatives, and then different things like that. I know, Dr. Watson, you lead Project Civitas, which kind of helps get involved in these local movements. Do you have suggestions, resources?
Well, no question. Your generation are digital natives.
Absolutely.
No question. It's like your hand. It's attached to your body. It's a part of your everyday life. So let's use that. Any social media platform is free and universal. It has a powerful voice. Your cell phone has more information in it than the Library of Alexandria and every other library of antiquity put together. The March for Our Lives movement was founded right here in the area. There's clubs everywhere. Join one or start one. The Me Too movement. It's been exciting over the last 2 years as women are beginning to say no to Harvey Weinstein's and Brett Kavanaugh's and Donald Trump's and standing up for this. If there's not a local chapter, start one. My son has been active in all these, and he said it's a reinvigorating, it's darn near a spiritual process to go out and find all these young people marching together, getting excited. Any local city, every city has a Democratic club, a Republican club. Just go online and find out and call. Here's what you're going to find out as a student. You're going to call and say, I'd like to be an officer and get active, and they're going to bend over backwards to make you an officer because everybody in the club is over 70. They're dying to have young people come out and get active. And it's so easy to do. The city of Boca, every city has a environmental advisory board, an education advisory board. They're looking for young people to serve on the advisory boards. It's a matter of just going online and asking. You would be surprised how easy it is to get a position of leadership in these kind of organizations.
I think part of what it is when people or young adults think of going out and making a difference, they think of, oh, it has to be something huge. I have to do something on a grand scale that's going to absolutely change everything. That's not the case. If you just, like you said, volunteer in your local communities, start something small and you can build it up. It doesn't have to be something big. Just go out, do anything. Go to your local beach, even if you're by yourself, and just help clean up the beaches. Like, do anything. Anything's going to help.
Greta and Malala were teenagers, and they are two of the most eloquent and powerful voices in the world today,
Absolutely.
And teenagers.
I think Greta's up for the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, she is.
Time Magazine's Person of the Year, and Malala's a prize winner. And the guys that run Four Oceans, that are cleaning the world's beaches, are young guys.
Absolutely.
The head of Tom's Shoes, a young person. It's remarkable. Every pair of shoes you buy, they give one away to kids in need. We need to remember that Alexander Hamilton and his friend the Marquis de Lafayette, these guys were teenagers when they were winning the Revolutionary War and independence for the country. So you're never too young to make a profound difference.
And I wanted to touch a little bit on what, Veronica, you were saying earlier. It's also important to realize that just a single person can start a movement. Like, Greta is an international hero to many, but regardless of what you think about her, an international figure. But she started by herself. She started by, not going to school on Friday, which is where the Fridays for Future movement was born, and sitting outside and protesting what she believed was an inadequate response to the climate action she thinks we need to take. And because she believed in it, and she was powerful, and she was persistent, and she didn't let people make fun of her, what happened is people gathered around her. And so it's just important that, I think, instead of trying to dissuade the young people, we encourage them by giving them support. Like, imagine what Greta could have done if, instead of President Trump tweeting that she needs to go watch a movie with her friends instead of actually take action, he had given her support on the international stage, something like that. And I actually have a resource that I wanted to mention to both of you. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. Do either of you know about DoSomething.org?
Yeah.
Awesome. Veronica, have you heard anything?
I do not.
Well, DoSomething.org is this fantastic website that I wanted to bring up and touch on today for young people. If you're looking to get involved in any way and you aren't really sure where to start, I would highly recommend DoSomething.org. From their own website, it's the largest not-for-profit exclusively for young people and social change. They have millions of members that represent every United States area code and 131 countries. And basically what it is you can put in what you're interested in, whether it's the environment, women's issues, social issues, legislative issues, and they can find a campaign for you, which you can then assist in whatever way you can, whether that's donating your time, your money, social media. And I just kind of wanted to touch on how this is, a great resource. And I just wanted to emphasize the idea that, as Veronica said and as Dr. Watson agreed with, you don't have to do something that's going to break records right away. Start small. And if people are discouraging you, as Dr. Watson said, that's because you're doing something right.
Yeah, and actually, when I was doing my freshman year in Ohio, I was volunteering at this little local church. I forget the name of it. Okay. And there's this nice little nun. I also forget her name, but I am still in contact with her. We send emails to each other, and she's the sweetest person. And I was doing my volunteer work with her, actually, because they had, like, a bunch of animals, and I was volunteering my time over Christmas. We did, like, nativity scenes with the animals for the kids, and I would go, like, every weekend and help her take care of the animals because she was older. She couldn't do it by herself, and she was the only one assigned to work with the animals. And now she emailed me back, and the church actually loved so much that what I was helping her with, they actually made a whole program, and now they have, like, younger little kids coming and working with the animals and learning respect for the animals. So like you said, anything can help. Anything can start anything.
I was going to mention another one. It's called NextGen, GEN, journal.com.
Okay.
It's an online, news organization for teenagers and college students.
Really?
Anybody can go on and blast out whatever your thoughts are
That's amazing.
and read news that's relevant to your generation. Blog.
Absolutely.
Start a vlog.
Start a school newspaper.
Do a show like this.
Editor-in-chief.
Yeah, anything like that works. Another thing I always tell my students, a lot of them say, look, I can't affect the change at the polls. We can only vote once every 2 years. But what I always tell them is every day you can vote with your wallet. Find a company whose social record on women, diversity, community transparency, animal testing, something you agree with. And if find a company you don't agree with, support them and boycott them.
Exactly.
I've been boycotting Chick-fil-A and Nestle for years. Nestle's had some horrific policies in Africa. Chick-fil-A, I think, is homophobic. So
Really?
why on earth would I want to give my money to an organization that promotes homophobia
Exactly.
and a political agenda that I think is dangerous? So I don't give them my money the same way you wouldn't give some bigot in the dorm, you wouldn't lend them $50. On the other hand, I've always supported Hershey Foods, Ben and Jerry's, Tom Shoes, Patagonia. These organizations do so much to affect a positive change in this world. So I shop my conscience. I try to shop for a better world and put my money where my mouth is. It only takes 5 minutes online, and you can find out whatever brands you like or don't like. You can find out their social record
Exactly.
and start shopping your conscience. And through every purchase, you're affecting a change.
Absolutely.
I never thought of that. That's actually a really good point and a really good idea.
The other thing that
Way
people
to own it.
Sorry. The other thing that people don't realize too is even if you're not old enough to actually go out and vote, you can still call your local representative and
Yes.
tell them, "Hey, I want you to support this bill or oppose this bill." You can start campaigns on social media, as Dr. Watson said, the hashtag #MeToo movement. It's so easy to start a movement to spread awareness. That's a really big thing. Just to educate people in general, to have these conversations.
In Florida, they let you pre-register long before you're 18, so you can be pre-registered when you get your driver's license, and as soon as you turn 18, your voting card comes to you, so you're ready to go.
Absolutely, and that's actually something I wanted to say. DoSomething.org also has tons of voter registration drives, so if you want people to get more involved in your local community, you could volunteer with one of those. There's just a plethora of ways for you to get your voice heard, even if you aren't yet old enough to actually vote. Now, I have some specific questions about some of these different resources, given your plentiful and amazing career. So what do you think is probably the easiest way for high school students to find a voice for themselves or make a voice for themselves?
Let's say threefold. One, social media.
Okay.
It's a no-brainer. Two, your friends.
Okay.
When you get together with your friends and, when you're out at, I don't know, movie, pizza, whatever it is you're going to do, talk about products that have positive records or whatever. Find a locally owned business and go out there for your food, for your pizza or your drinks or whatever it is you're going to do, that kind of thing. But then the other thing is, I have worked with countless local political clubs, Democratic clubs in my case, and they are so interested in having young people. And when I've had students of mine and I have them call or go along with me to a town hall when I run a town hall, they walk up and introduce themselves to a state senator or a member of Congress, and that person grabs them immediately to work with them. About a half dozen of our local elected officials here in the area, their chiefs of staff are all my former students, and they got started by literally calling them or just showing up. So pick up the phone, call the local office. This year is a campaign season. Most elected officials here and around the country are running for office or running for re-election. They would love to have people get involved in the campaign, and once you do that, you get to meet all the principal movers and shakers and set yourself up with an internship job or volunteer opportunity afterward. So that's three very easy ways to get active.
Awesome. Veronica, have you, in your personal experience, tried any of those ways?
I actually, what he said about finding local places to eat instead of the chains, I always try to go to the mom and pop shops. Even for my dog, I don't go to PetSmart to shop. I go to these, I think it's called Paws to Health or something, and it's so much better. You can find better quality food, better ingredients. So I love doing it to find locally sourced things instead of supporting the chains.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your thoughts on that.
Thank you for doing this program.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. So briefly before we wrap up, we've talked a lot about those resources. I hope if you're watching that you maybe know something now that you didn't before. You have a place to go, a place to start if you want to get involved. And before we wrap it up, I wanted to talk briefly, circling back to the acquittal, not in reference to how it impacts the youth, but would either of you like to share any of your thoughts or reactions about the acquittal in the impeachment proceedings?
I think I put my trust in the system.
Okay.
So I trust how the process went.
Okay.
I'm devastated. I think from a constant, I've spent, bachelor's, master's, PhD, 10 years as a student, 30 years as a professor, writing about the Constitution and founders, books and so on. I think it's a travesty. Now, here's the kicker. Whether you agree or disagree with me doesn't matter. Own it either way.
Exactly.
I think it was a miscarriage of justice, not allowing witnesses, people before the trial saying, I'm just going to collude with the accused, and people knew their votes before the evidence was brought out. This is what is at stake right now, in my opinion. And this is why your generation needs to step up to the plate, because my generation has failed. What is at stake right now, I don't think is President Trump or this election. I think it's the integrity of the rule of law. I think it's the Constitution. I think it's about what kind of nation we are and are going to become. Are we a nation that is open for all people, or are we going to label anyone different from us a rapist, a murderer? Are we going to put children in cages at the Mexican border? Are we going to claim we don't believe in vaccinating our children? We don't believe in climate change. We don't believe in evolution. We don't believe in science. I mean, we are at a point right now, we're at a tipping point. And if ever there was a time for your generation to come out and vote, and I'm guardedly optimistic, your generation for the last 30 years has been voting between 20 and 25% turnout. In the 2018 midterm, 31% young people. So there's an upward tick. I think this is a time for your generation to come out and say, this is our country. We're inheriting this. We have a voice. Because it's our democracy, I think, in our Constitution. This is the gravest threat, in my opinion, since the Civil War.
Well, my mother has always said, and I'm probably going to send this to her, so hi, Mom, has always said that you should have the beliefs you have. If she disagrees with them, that's fine, but you should be able to back up what you believe.
Of course.
And I honestly feel like the way that this impeachment is going is kind of contrary to that philosophy. Like the Senate voting not to hear any more witnesses, not to hear any more evidence.
No facts.
How are you going to make a decision that monumental without being able to back it up necessarily, other than, oh, well, I'm also a Republican, or, oh, I'm a Democrat, on both sides? You know, like, you should not align in a trial like that your decision with your party or your friends. You should make your own verdict. And I think that it's important to send that message to young people instead of the message of, I do what my friends want to do.
Your mother was right, and I'll leave you with this. George Washington, a couple of the framers had the concern. We have checks and balances, we have impeachment, we have, separation of powers. What happens if people begin to put their parties ahead of their loyalty to country and Constitution? And I think that's where we are now. And democracies don't do well if people put their loyalty to a party or an interest group above their allegiance and support to their country and Constitution.
Exactly.
We're all Americans, we're all in this together, and we've got to transcend these differences and find a way of coming together and moving this thing forward.
Exactly. Well, thank you guys so much for your remarks. I believe that that's all the time we have today. I'm Marissa McGrady signing off. Thank you for joining us.